Hello all! Today I'll be working on a large hand-woven blanket and talking a bit about the streams and brooks that inspired it. I hope you enjoy. My name is Took. I'm a disabled genderqueer weaver who's had life take odd turns, but who knows that even tattered and worn yarn still has value, and that tired joints and health flares don't have to stop the journey. I weave exclusively with secondhand fibers, aided with adaptive warping, HR and OSHA cats, and a wonderful found family. Welcome to Hawksong Weaving, where all our paths are a little bit warped. For this blanket project, I fully admit that I was so excited about the sheer amount of yarn goodness that I jumped the gun on weaving. So I don't have footage of the first panel of this blanket, but here we go for the warp of the second bit. All of these yarns are a variety of acrylic yarns I thrifted or were donated to me. I had a bunch of bulkier acrylic yarns, especially the Lion brand homespun style, that are super soft, but don't do as well in scarves or other projects. My partners have been stressed for a while, so I wanted something warm, soft, and heavy that we could snuggle under during our Star Wars Saturdays. I hadn't ever seen any aside from A New Hope, so we've been working our way through the Machete order and are about to start on an Ashoka-based viewing of Clone Wars. Side note, as someone who has narrowly avoided various pipelines to the alt-right, i.e. crunchy to alt-right pipeline, the diet culture to alt-right pipeline, and had the incel to alt-right pipeline shoved at him when he was changing his social media settings to male, I have complex feelings about Anakin, which I have been led to believe are the norm, that we are all having complex feelings about Anakin, but also, If you're curious about the adaptive warping method I'm using here, feel free to check out my other content. I have an entire playlist on how I came to this warping method. I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and with that comes a lot of joint pain and chronic pain and joint hypermobility, so this is the warping method I've adapted to suit my needs. I found that most traditional warping pegboards were too heavy on my arms and my wallet, so instead I use a small accordion coat rack. I keep it pinned with the warping peg and the loom, and from experience I know what pegs to warp to get the length I want for a specific project. This is what works for me. It won't work for everyone, and that's okay. Weaving has a long history, and while it's important to honor that when you can, it's also just as important to not be in pain while you craft. You matter too. A bit of a time skip because this is going to be a longer video, and with the warp thread sorted, I'm lifting up the loom to release the warping board from the loom, gathering the warp threads into one large bundle, and using the back of my neck to drape them over and keep them tidy and out of the way, while I collapse the warping board and get it tucked out of the way. I use terry cloth towels to cushion the warp threads. This helps prevent the finished weaving from being tighter at the ends and looser in the middle, creating a sort of sausage profile in the weaving. The way I warp has me cutting the warp loops at the end of winding the warp. This is what's easiest on my body. It won't work for everyone, but that's okay. This isn't a great angle, but I'm being careful to pay attention to how the warp threads are laying on the back bar of the loom, and the right hand thread goes through the smaller hole in the rigid heddle reed. It's not critical, and some minor mistakes aren't the end of the world, but it does make it easier to keep the tension of the warp threads even across the entire weaving, as does weaving and warping with higher strength warp, because you're not going to be able to get as high a tension and therefore more even tension if you're using thinner, weaker threads. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you'd like to support my work, some free ways to do that are to like, subscribe, or follow, and share. This applies to other small artists as well. It's a great way to let the social media algorithms know that this is content worth watching. If you'd like to support me financially, there's a Buy Me a Coffee linked below, which acts as sort of a tip jar. Also, now that there are so many of you absolutely fantastic and wonderful subscribers, I've been able to link the online song weaving shop, so feel free to check out the unique handwoven products. This next bit is absolutely a joke, but just in case in this economy, I won't say no. For $1,000 a month, you can tell me that I'm not actually disabled, I'm just lazy, and to try whatever yoga, juice cleanse, snake oil nonsense fixed your cousin. Feel free to message me and I'll get you my payment details. I take Cash App, Venmo, and PayPal for this nonsense. Attaching the warp to the bottom apron bar is pretty easy. I finger comb it, get it separated into bits about 4 to 5 warp threads wide, separate these bits into 2, and then do a half hitch tie to the apron bar. Then it's just a matter of tightening and adding the bottom terry cloth towel to help prevent the sausaging and to help with the tension, and just getting ready to get going. I love this process. It's so incredibly soothing and rewarding, and afterwards I get a blanket. And yeah, this blanket will be for sale, but it's going to be a $600 blanket if based on $85 per panel and all the hand weaving and hand sewing that goes into this, so I'm not expecting it to move very quickly, so in the meantime my partners and I will have a blanket. And now for the actual fun bit, the weaving, and I'm able to use this absolutely gorgeous Lion Brand homespun yarn for this first pass, and it's just, I love working with ombre yarns like this. They're so, just watching the colors stack on themselves is so much fun for me, and I get to watch the color build and shift, and this particular yarn is so freaking soft. I'm really looking forward to this finished blanket. I chose the colors and textures of this blanket based on the streams, rivers, and brooks that I have known and loved throughout my life. As a homeschooler, I grew up along the Whetstone Brook in southern Vermont. There was this homeschool program I went to that I absolutely adored, and we had read the book Roxaboxen by Alice McLaren, which was about this play world these children had created out in the desert. And so we created Streamville. Our houses were outlined in stone we bartered with the stream glass we found. You know that tendency young kids have for recreating Stone Age cultures while playing? Yeah, we had an entire barter system established with the stream glass. Greens, browns, and white glass were the most plentiful, so they were essentially pennies, nickels, dimes, and a really nice piece might be a quarter. But if you found blue stream glass, that was easily 20 bucks. And if you found red, yeah, you had a $500 bill right there, because you could not find red in that stream to save your life. But we also found bits of broken red brick and pounded them into a paint, attempted stone tools made from broken quartz stone, and all during this we were learning to weave baskets and make tea from local wild plants. My memories of this program are easily some of my absolute favorite memories from my childhood. I also grew up along the West River in southern Vermont, and the West River has some absolutely gorgeous serpentine. It's not gemstone quality, but I grew up calling it river marble, and it was so beautiful, and I still have several pieces of that rock in my home that I have carried from apartment to apartment in my adult life, because it's so pretty, just the way the banding and the greens and the blues, and yeah, I love serpentine, I love river marble, whatever you want to call it, and the West River is such an incredible resource in the area. Another one of my homeschool programs was an archaeology dig where I found a quartz hand axe that was later on put in the local public library as an example of the Paleolithic indigenous population in the area. And just, yeah, no, the streams and rivers are just the lifeline. And even when Tropical Storm Irene happened and everyone realized, oh, all of Vermont's infrastructure is next to a stream and or river because it does not make sense to build the infrastructure up over the mountains, it was still no, you have bitten us, but we still love you. You are still the lifeblood of this area and this community. And just streams matter. Water matters on so many levels. And of course, now I've helped start the Mill River Marginalized Artists Collective, and I am realizing more and more about the Mill River in the Northampton and surrounding areas in Massachusetts. And this river is one of the longest tributaries going into the Connecticut River watershed system, and it's got rainbow trout and so much wildlife still around on it and in it, and I love the fact that these rivers and streams have followed me throughout my life and that I have followed them. I don't think I would ever be comfortable not living in a watershed riparian zone, because if you're not, I barely feel comfortable if I don't have a mountain in my adjacent proximity, because no, if you don't have a mountain, then what is stopping the sun from smiting you off the face of the earth, or the wind? You need those as guardians against the sky. I know this is very much, probably a me thing, but it's also just, no, I like my northern Appalachian mountains, the Green Mountains, the White Mountains. It's no, I'm gonna stay over here, please, thank you. Now tying off the panel fringes, because I'm not bothering to measure these panels, I'm just going to do a sliding knot. The ends will be bound anyways. When weaving one of these blankets, because I have a smaller loom, I weave them in multiple panels depending on how much yarn I have. With this particular blanket, I ended up weaving about 7 panels, and I wanted a large blanket. I wanted to be able to cuddle underneath it. In previous videos about making blankets, people have asked how I made sure that the panels were the same length, and the short answer is I wing it. The longer answer is, due to my hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I'm effectively dyslexic. Essentially, my eyes are hypermobile, and that causes problems with reading, especially numbers. Math is incredibly difficult for me because the numbers jump around and don't follow patterns like words do. I can pattern recognize words when I'm having a hard time with my eyes not cooperating, but numbers don't have that pattern for the math I'd be doing for weaving. So I guesstimate, and I keep track of how much spring the yarn has and use my loom as a measuring tool, and I'm usually careful to only use wool blends that will steam block more effectively for large projects like this. But since I'm doing this blanket with only acrylic yarn, I'm binding the hems, because I don't want to spend my time ramming my brain against my disabilities. I'd much rather spend my time and energy on actually weaving and sewing. Unrolling, and you can see the greens of the serpentine and the red brick and the copper mica flecks and the birch bark logs in the water, and you can just, I'm so incredibly pleased with how this particular panel turned out, and also just, I can't wait to see the entire thing done. Getting the panels all sorted and tucked in so that I can next get going on the sewing of this panel on, and here we go! I've got this little ball of gray. It's not going to be enough for the sewing for the entire blanket, but I'm going to get started with it. I'm trying to use my scissors as a weight, but it's not working, so just keeping my hand on it so it doesn't slide backwards. Gotta love everything about this. I'm just like, no, you will get over here, you will behave, you cannot escape me, do not disobey me. Rah! Because I'm binding the ends of these, I'm not worrying too much about loose ends. That'll get trimmed off later on in the project. And just doing a simple square knot, and then I do a whip stitch where I hook the needle through the weft loop of the selvage, or the edge of the panel, and the outermost warp thread at the same time, and do a whip stitch jumping diagonally from each panel all the way up. And once I finished all the panels, I'm heave-hoing this massive weight of hand-woven blanket and getting it sorted and ready for the next step of binding the edges. Because I knew that I would be binding this blanket, I'm not too worried about the mismatched length of the weaving blanks that have now been sewn together. But in order to get this all one length and bind it properly and not have lumpy knots underneath the binding, I'm using a tight zigzag stitch, almost an applique stitch, to sew a line about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the blanket, of where I want the blanket to be, and then I'll cut the knots off. This stabilizes the woven fabric and prevents it from unraveling, like a serger but less persnickety. For this project, I'm using quilting thread as it's a bit stronger and I trust it more on my old sewing machine. I then take my don't ask me how much I paid for these good shears and cut down the line that I've sewn out. For those familiar with machine sewing, it's like the opposite of stitching in the ditch, or at least that's how my brain makes sense of it. I then take my pins and the blanket binding that I found at the thrift store and get to work and get going on binding the edge of this hem. This is a nylon binding thing. I get what I get at the local thrift stores, and I do what I can with it. This is not the best texture, and it's a bit slippy, but it's what I've got. I'm still figuring out blanket binding, and I'm aware that this is not the way that people are supposed to do this, but this is what's working for me in this particular project, so I'm making do as best I can. I'm having to fend off Penelope Calico because she has found a delightful new thing that she loves to do, which is attack my pin cushion, pull out multiple pins, and then jump down on the floor and just leave them on the floor. She finds this hilarious. I don't know why, but I'm keeping a very close eye on her in this because I don't want to step on pins. It's not fun. I'm using that same zigzag stitch and just getting the base piece on, getting that first row down, and then figuring out as I go where I want the zigzag stitches, and yeah, getting things going. Wielding the weight of this blanket was honestly the most complicated part of this entire sewing bit. It was so freaking heavy, and it was very unwieldy and absolutely dragging, so I ended up having to use a lot more physical effort than I was wanting to get things like fully up and running. Once I was done with this particular section, I then moved on to the other one, and I had a blanket, and it was absolutely gorgeous, and I'm so incredibly thrilled with how it turned out. This blanket was actually so big that I had a really hard time figuring out how I was going to show it off, so please ignore the surrounding and the fact that this is having to be hung up on the bar between our living room and office, but oh, it turned out so freaking pretty. It's so heavy and warm and delightful and soft, and it's going to be absolutely perfect for my partners and I to snuggle under this weekend. If folks are willing, I'll show a picture of all three of us snuggling when it comes to that time, but this video is getting posted on Friday, so it's not Saturday yet, but my partners have already absolutely loved this, and yeah. Thank you for spending time with me at Hawksong Weaving, where we're all a bit warped, and I hope that you have a truly excellent week.